This is Brenda Carrico Collins, and I'm doing this recording for my son Matt. I was born September 16th, 1949, in a little town in Norton, Virginia, small hospital, and I was the oldest of 5 children born to that marriage. My mother left when I was in the 3rd grade and got with a man by the name of Andy Engel, and they had 5 children, so I have 5 step siblings. When I was about a year and a half old, or 2 years old, my sister Glenda was born when I was a year and a half, so I tried to feed her graham crackers when she was just a few months old. I don't remember doing that, but that was probably one of the earliest things that I remember anyone told me about. When I started school in the 1st grade, with not being around very many people, I was so shy that they felt like I wasn't ready for school, so I had to wait a year. When I was about in the 3rd grade, my mother left, took off with Andy Engel, and left Dad to take care of us 5 kids. And I know that was overwhelming for him, being an older man with 5 little kids to feed and no help, and to take care of us and see that we got to school. So he began drinking and became an alcoholic. And so we did not have very much growing up. We didn't have running water. We had an outside toilet. I remember having to go over and get water at the neighbor's house in buckets. And they had a rooster. And that rooster would, every time I would go out there, that rooster would jump up on me and attack me, and I was scared to death of that rooster. And I would have done anything but haul water, but I guess that was one of my chores. And finally, I think Dad started doing it so I wouldn't have to. Gary went with me once and had a stick, and he would try to keep the rooster away from me, but that was one of my big fears growing up, was that dumb old rooster. We didn't see my mother again for 5 years. She moved to Ohio, and like I said, she had 5 kids. So I remember when Gary started school, I was about in the 5th grade, and he cried, so they had him come in and sit with me until the end of school. They had also told my dad that they should hold him back a year so he could start with Chris, because, like I said, we were all very shy kids and wasn't really around that many people when we were little. Gary had 2 new pencils in his pocket, and the teacher had asked him, "Where did you get those pencils?" And Gary she thought he stole them, so that was why he started crying. So we spent a lot of time at my Grandma Turner's. I remember she had beautiful morning glory flowers and a big garden. She also had a lot of chickens, and she would catch the chickens and put them on a chopping block and cut their heads off, and they would be running around the yard. And that always freaked me out. I couldn't handle that blood running. It was just so gross. My grandma was always cooking. She had a big family. I think she had like 15 kids. And so she's always making biscuits and gravy and bacon every morning. So no matter when you walked into that kitchen, there was always fresh biscuits on the stove, and there was always something to eat when you walked into her house. So we really liked being there, because we didn't always have a lot to eat growing up, because my dad was drunk a lot. And I remember one time when Dad was drunk and we didn't have any food, our neighbors would go to church on Sunday. And so I remember a couple times when they left to go to church that my sister Glenda and I would sneak into their house after they left, and we would steal flour so we could go home and make biscuits or gravy or both. It was just a sad time. And I remember another time that we went down to a little grocery store, and the little old man was always asleep in there. And so we went in, and he didn't wake up. And so I took some oatmeal, and we stole it and left the store because we didn't have anything to eat. And, he probably knew we did it, but he never acted like he was awake or anything. But, I'm ashamed of stealing it now, but at the time I felt like it was necessary to feed my brothers and sisters. And then one time Glenda was chopping weeds, and she cut her foot really bad, and Dad had to get her to the doctor, and they put clamps in it. Never had a car, so he had to hitchhike a lot. I'm not sure how Glenda got to the doctor, but he did take her there. And So we had a really tough life. My grandma, like I said, she had 15 kids. There was 88 grandkids, and I'm the oldest of 88. And of course, Glenda's the second oldest. And then at the time she died, she had 78 great grandkids. So we have a lot of cousins and a lot of relatives. Back in the day, we would wash clothes, and we did not have a clothes dryer, of course, so we'd have to hang the clothes out on the line and they would freeze dry, and then we would have to bring them in the house so they could finish getting dry. So you had like stiff shirts and pants all over the house. Just didn't really have a real good growing up, a lot of good memories. It seems like we were always, I remember Gary told me he would go to bed hungry a lot of times, and it was just sad. And, when you don't have a mother around to help, it was a lot on me and Glenda to help take care of the little kids. Rick had a pink shirt when he was a little guy, a cute little guy with blonde curly hair. And so he had this pink shirt, and we used to call him Pink Baby, so that name kind of stuck for a while. And then one time we had a snake in our house. When my aunt had given us a stove, I think it was an electric stove, and where they drilled a hole in the floor for the cord to go, a snake had got in the house and was behind the stove, and we saw something and told Dad. So, of course, he had to get a shovel or a hoe or whatever and come in there and kill the snake. One other thing that I remembered was that when we lived at a place called Honey Branch, Glenda and I was going to school one day, and there was a big snake just spread out across the lane we had to walk down, and we just stepped over it like nothing and kept on going down to catch the school bus. In that same lane, Dad had bought us some rubber boots. I thought they were white. Glenda thinks they were red. Who knows? But regardless, we didn't like those boots. You had to put them on over your shoes. So we took them off, put them behind a big pine tree, and we would get them after school when the bus stopped. Well, one day, Dad walked down there, and he saw the boots, so we took them home. And we thought, oh boy, we're really in trouble now. So when we got home, he asked how the boots were. We said they worked out pretty good. He says, well, they must not be too good. You girls are hiding them down there behind the tree. So we never did that again because we knew we'd be in big trouble. But and then once I remember Dad was playing baseball with us kids, and he went to swing at the ball, and I think he did something to his arm. It cracked, and he didn't really know. He knew it hurt, but he didn't know anything else. And later on that evening, Chris was doing something, and Dad went to spank her, and when he raised his arm back, it snapped, and so he broke his arm. So we always tease Chris about breaking Dad's arm. And speaking of Chris, after Mother left, we were staying with this older lady. I think Dad was either in the hospital or I think he was in a hospital or some kind of a situation. He wasn't home, and Chris did not want to go to school, and so she threw a big fit. And the lady's name was Mrs. Collins, ironically. So she sent Gary across the street to the police department to get the police to come over there and have a word with Chris. Well, he showed up. And boy, Chris was really shaking in her shoes, and she was just really not happy about having to have the police be called on her. So after that, she would go to school pretty much, on time and not throw a fit about it. But we didn't live with that lady too long. My dad died in 1976 on March 12th, 77. That was 8 days before his birthday. My mother died on September 1st, 1990, at age 57, and that was 8 days before her birthday. So my dad was 76 when he died, and my mother was 57. Our dad was a lot of fun. He was always usually in a really good mood and real happy. And then I think when he would get depressed, get lonely, he would start drinking, and that kind of took a toll on him. But he always made sure we were clean. He would make sure we had our hair combed, we'd have on clean clothes. Whenever he would take us someplace, everybody would comment about how clean we were and how cute we looked and well-behaved. And my dad had a sister, Aunt Bonnie, and Aunt Bonnie was a great influence on us growing up. Her daughter, Janice, was the first time we ever made pizza was at their house, and Janice made pizza, and I believe it was like a Chef Boyardee box kit type thing. And it was awful. And it was years before I'd even try pizza again because I just did not like it at all. But we had an Aunt Julie, and she lived up on Sandy Ridge, and she was a good influence on us too. She would take Glenda for a couple of weeks in the summertime, and then maybe I would get to go for a few days, but usually I had to stay home to help take care of the little kids. The Not so good memories of my mother. I always held a grudge on her because she left us and we didn't see her again for 5 years. And it was just sad that I just never really had a really good relationship with her. The first year that she left, I remembered somebody, I don't know who it was, but a couple guys came. It was either like Christmas Eve or a couple days before Christmas. They bought 2 or 3 big boxes of food, and it had apples and oranges and walnuts and candy and just all kinds of stuff. And so that was probably one of the happiest Christmases that we had growing up. I don't really think there was any toys or anything in there. I know we were just so tickled to get apples and that sort of thing. Growing up, we never had birthday cakes or presents or anything like that for birthdays or Christmas. And I believe the first time I got a birthday cake was when I was 29, and we were in Alaska, Dick and Matt and Billy and I. And Dick and Billy went to a store in Anchorage and got a birthday cake for me. And so that was my first birthday cake, was when I was 29. And the only other cake I can remember was when I was 40, and I worked at Simcoe, and they had a surprise birthday party for me. But anyway, we had Dad was always a lot of fun. My mother was always complaining about everything and never really had a good relationship with her. And so when I was about just turned 15, teacher came into school one day and said, come out in the hallway. She wanted to talk to me. And it was another teacher. And Glenda was in the hallway. And so we went down to the principal's office, and we were informed that we were going to go live with our mother. And I remember Chris saying that she didn't have a mother. And so they took us outside, and Andy Engel, my mother, and all the other kids was in the car. So they put us in the car, and we left. We didn't get a chance to say goodbye to our friends, our teachers, or any other relatives. Gary says that we did stop at the house we were staying at Mrs. Collins's, and we threw all of our clothes in the trunk of the car. I don't really remember that, but Gary says he remembers because on the way to Ohio, we got stopped, and the policeman thought the tail light was out, but I guess there was a piece of clothing hanging out of the trunk. And so anyway, so we headed on to Ohio, and so there was 9 of us kids at that time, and then later on, Mother had Sharon, and she's the baby. But Glenda and I would always fight with Andy because when we were at school, he would dump all of our clothes out of our dresser drawers in the middle of the floor, and Mother would never make him stop, and she would always stick up for him. So we told him that if he kept doing that, and the next time we had to babysit him, we were going to beat his butt. So time came when my mother and Andy Engel were going to the grocery store, and Andy cried because he said, Brenda Glenda's going to whip me. And we said, oh, no, we're not. So as soon as Mother left, we grabbed him, and we beat his butt like there was no tomorrow. But I kind of think that stopped him from getting in our stuff for a while. And his dad did tell him to stay out of our room and stay out of our stuff. But yeah, we had some bad times with Andy because Mother would never correct him and let him get by with being mean to Rick. And that was one thing I always didn't like about her. But so in 1970, my little brother Mikey was 7 years old, and Rick and Andy was going over to the school to play ball. So Mike took out chasing after them, and he ran right into the path of a train in Caledonia, and he died. He got hit by the train, and that was just an awful time. And I think at that time, I think my mother got worse. I think she really just totally lost it, and she always blamed Rick. And then Chris said she even blamed her, and Chris was upstairs trying to get Sharon to sleep at the time. So neither one of those kids had anything to do with it. I think Mother was just trying to divert the blame away from herself, but it really wasn't her problem. I mean, she didn't cause it either, but I think she just wanted to blame somebody, and it probably made her feel better to blame the kids. But so right after that, I mean, she was totally horrible to Rick, and Gary had moved out. I guess he was living with Glenda, and it was about a week before Dick and I got married. And Rick left, and he walked over to our house in Fair Park and was hiding in the shed when we came home. So Mother called and made a big deal about he's not going to live with us, and I said, well, he's not living with you either. So she told somebody he was a runaway, and they put him in a children's home. So he lived there for a year or so, and he was in a foster home for a while. And finally, one day, Dick said to me, Brenda, I said, I think we're going to get Rick to come and live with us. So he talked to Paul Rogers at the children's home, and so Rick came to live with us. And at that time, we had built a house out in Ridgedale School District on Holland Road. So Rick lived with us probably the last 2 or 3 years of his high school, and he got into sports and got decent grades. And so then he had a girlfriend, Kara, and they seemed really happy, and I think he really loved her. So for the first time in my life, I think Rick was really, really happy. So how I met my husband, I was uptown one night with one of my friends, and we were riding around, and I got pulled over. And I know, Matt, you've already heard this story, but I had one headlight. So this really good-looking policeman gets out of the car and tells me that he wanted to know if I knew I had a headlight missing. Of course, I didn't. And he said, well, you ought to get it fixed. So I did. And a few days later, maybe a week or two, we were at Frisch's, me and my friend, and he pulls up beside me. And my friend says, oh, no, there's that policeman. What did you do? I said, I didn't do anything. Well, then he came over and was talking to us, and he said, well, see, you got that headlight fixed. And I said, yeah. So one thing led to another, and next month it's going to be 51 years that we've been married. So we've had a really good marriage, done a lot of things, built a lot of houses. I think I've done everything on a house that you could possibly have me do, except being on the roof. We've had some good vacations. We've been to Hawaii twice. We've been to Canada several times, been to Nova Scotia, been to Alaska twice, been all the way out west, been to almost every state in the Union. But we have just always had a good time together, and he's been a really good husband and a good father and just my best friend. But so back to me growing up, my brothers and sisters and I would sit on the front porch, and we would watch cars go by. And Gary reminded me of this the other night when we were talking, that we'd play this little game, like, the first car would be mine, the second car would be Glenda's, and on and on. Well, you might get a really cool new car, and you might get an old piece of junk. But anyway, that was just something for us kids to do, and we obviously had fun doing it. Dad always had a really good garden, perfect garden, no weeds, and everything grew. And Gary was reminding me about how Dad had this garden, and he had this leaf lettuce, and it was just beautiful, and people would just stop and make over that. And so Dad would give them some lettuce to take home with them. And his dad was Mitch Carrico, and he was an older guy and really weird, and he loved his orange juice. Well, he lived with my Aunt Bonnie and her kids, and so he would buy a half-gallon jug of orange juice, and he made this little wire crate for it, and he put a lock on it, and he had these keys attached to his belt. And so whenever he went to the refrigerator, he would take that, it was like on a little extension-like thing, he would take those keys off, unlock that lock on his orange juice, pour a little bit in a glass, lock it back up, put it back in the refrigerator, and go back to his room. And he stayed in his room all the time. I mean, he never came out. He never visited with anybody except to eat, and then he would go right back to his room again. And I think he probably slept most of the time. But the first person that I ever saw dead was my Uncle Bud. And when he died, and I was probably about 6 years old, and they brought him to the house in his casket, and they put him in the living room, and people would come into our house to see him. Well, they put 50-cent pieces on his eyes, and Glenda and I just could not imagine why he had money on his eyes, and I'm sure we probably tried to take it, but we knew better, and we didn't do it. I think we were scared. But So then, on down later in life, when we came to Ohio, we had rented a big old farmhouse in Edison, Ohio. Well, not really Edison, it was Denmark. And a neat old farmhouse with a big old barn. And my brothers and Chris would go out and play with BB guns and shoot each other. And one time, I guess Rick shot Chris, and Gary said that boy, Chris got so mad, and I guess she laid into him and wanted to beat him up. And I guess Gary probably separated them. But so I didn't really have a happy childhood. I can't really think of a lot of things that I need to say that would make any difference to anybody. But we, like I said, we had some good times with Dad, not so good times with Mother. We always loved to go to our aunt's house, and I had a half brother, Don, that was my dad's boy, and then he had an older daughter named Jeanette. And Jeanette's husband was the sheriff of Wise County, and she had a beautiful house, and they would take Glenda for a week or so, and then they would take me and Rick for a week or so. And Glenda might have spent more time there than I did. But like I said, at one time, before we came to live with Mother, Dad had been sick, and of course he was drunk for a long time. And so I think he was either in a rehab place or in the hospital, and we were living with this Mrs. Collins. So apparently the court was going to try to find homes for us, and they were going to split us up. And that's why Mother came and got us, because she just didn't want us to. Grandma called her and said, "Hey, Ruth, you better come to get these kids because they're going to split them up." And so as much as I resented my mother for leaving us, I'm thankful that she did come back and pick us all up so we could stay together. But I guess that's one thing I am thankful to her for. I just never really got over her leaving us. But my new life later on made up for a lot of the bad times that I had growing up. I had the absolute best in-laws ever. They were like my mom and dad. We had some really good times with them. And I had bonus children. So when I got married, I got 3 bonus children whom I love like my own kids. And then 3 years later, we had Matt. And of course, he was the joy of my life, and he always will be. So now Matt's married to Kim, who I love like a daughter. And she's got 2 daughters, Haley and Hannah. And Haley has been a joy to us in the fact that she has 2 kids, Cambry Ray and Axton Nicholas, that we absolutely, absolutely adore and think the world of. And those 2 kids have brought us more happiness than they will ever, ever know. So I guess I didn't really have a whole lot to say, and I don't have a whole lot of memories growing up, but I am thankful that that Matt did meet and marry Kim, and we just want to have the best lives we can, and love you all, and I'm going to hang up now, sign off. Bye. Okay, this is a continuation of what I started earlier. Growing up, we didn't have a lot, so when we did get something, we were very thankful and just tickled pink. So I remember once Dad was going to get me a new pair of shoes. So we went to the shoe store, and I was trying on some shoes, and then I spotted this pair of red shoes. And my dad said, "No, you can't get those. They have to be these black ones or these brown ones." And I said, "No, I just don't want those. I wanted the red shoes." So he finally gave in to me, and I bought these red shoes. And I probably just thought I was something having those shoes. I remember wearing those to school and having to walk, and I got blisters on my heels, and the blisters popped, they bled. I would not take off the shoes. But like I said, we didn't have a lot, and my Aunt Bonnie would bring clothes over to me and Glenda, which was her daughters, because Janice was probably 2 or 3 years older than me. So whenever she would outgrow stuff, Glenda and I would get those things. And I don't know how the boys ever got anything new, but everything we had was usually passed down to us. And then Gary was Dad's favorite, and he knows that, and we all knew it. If Dad would happen to go get, like penny candy, and he would buy something, one for each one of us, Gary would have to have two. Or once in a while, if we lucked out and got a whole candy bar, Gary would have to have two. And the little stinker would put one in his pocket, eat one with us, and then, a few hours later, he'd pull one out of his pocket and show it off. And so we always knew he was spoiled, and I kind of get a kick out of it now, but back then I'm sure we were ready to smack him a good one. But, and I know when we moved to Ohio, my stepdad was very stingy, very tight with his money, would only take Mother to the grocery store, and was very, like I said, he had her on a strict budget. He wouldn't let her buy a lot of stuff. And so, she had to buy stuff that would go a long way. And so I know I worked, I used to babysit, and my senior year, I went to school half a day, and I worked at Silver Street School half a day. And then when I got off at Silver Street, probably about 3:45, I would go to work at the Y and work there until 9 o'clock. And then I would try to, I'd have to try to save the money or put it up for my class ring, my cap and gown, and if I wanted to dress for prom or anything like that, I would have to buy it myself because, they just would not give us any money for anything. And I know he had money. He would hide it. He would send money to his wife, Polly. Speaking of wives, I don't know that him and my mother ever got married. I think they just left Virginia and took off and went to Ohio. And because I don't ever remember my dad talking about a divorce papers, or I don't ever remember anything coming in the mail or anybody serving him with anything. And so she and Andy, like I said before, they had the 5 kids. And Andy being the oldest, he was the meanest, and he could just get by with anything. And I remember once they bought Gary and Chris and Andy and Roxy new bikes. Well, poor little Rick did not get a new bike, and that just bugged me to death that they could get a few bikes, but Rick wouldn't get one. And I just felt sorry for Rick. He was always slighted. And Gary would work at Manassas supermarket to have some extra spending money, or because he just wanted to get out of the house. Glenda worked at the Palace, and then it was kind of like all of us kids just kind of got out of the house as soon as we could. When I graduated, I went to work at the phone company, and I think I was making $1.90 an hour, but that was one of the best places to work in town. And so I had an apartment with Connie Bright for a while, and then she wanted a place of her own, so she moved out, and I didn't want to live in the apartment by myself. I was a little bit scared of the area, so I moved in with Glenda. And I lived there until Dick and I got married, and that was April the 18th, 1970. But when I was living with Mother and Andy, Andy comes home one day, and somebody brings this little car, and it was just a little, I think it was like a 1960 Oldsmobile, and it was light green, just a tiny car, very cute. So my mother says to me, "That's your car." And I was so happy, and I was just thrilled that, I would be getting a car. Well, a few weeks later, well, it's not really my stepdad, but Andy's daughter, Gail, came. I don't know how she got there, if he went down and picked her up, or if she and her brothers came up. But all of a sudden now the car becomes hers and not mine, and she drove it back to Virginia. And I was totally resented him for them lying to me that was my car. And Glenn and I was so happy that, I think I was going to get a car because my mother never drove. And we thought, well, this way I'll have a car, and I can, take us to school and take her grocery shopping or whatever, because she'd always have to wait for Andy to do it. And a lot of times when he got paid, he would wait and come home later, and then he would say it was too late to take her to the grocery store, and she would have to wait till the next day. But he was he was just a real jerk sometimes. I mean, sometimes he stuck up for us girls, and especially when Andy was mean and would get into our stuff. And but they had Andy, then they had Roxy, and Roxy was a little bit older than Chris, and younger than Chris. So Chris and Roxy, I think, were always pretty close. But then Patsy, I was always closer to Patsy because she was just a little kid, about a year old when we went to Ohio. So Patsy was at our house a lot and played with Matt a lot growing up, and we just I just always enjoyed being around Patsy. Then Sharon was born, and Glenda seemed like Glenda kind of latched on to Sharon, had to be responsible for taking care of her, and Patsy was kind of my responsibility. So it seems like all my life I had to watch my siblings when I was only 9 years old, and then we got the other siblings after my mother left that we had to watch, and so it just seems like I always had, a lot of responsibility for no older than I was, and but we always liked going to Grandma's because there was a lot of kids there, and we'd always go out and play, and it just seemed like that was just something that we looked forward to. And I remember going to my grandma's so much that I would just jump on the bus and go to her house after school. And so anyway, I had to go home, and Dad told me, he says, "Now you come home tonight, don't go to Grandma's house." Well, I didn't. I jumped on the bus. Was going to go to Grandma's house. And so the next night I jumped on the bus to go to Grandma's house, and he was there, and he pulled me off that bus and made me go home. And I remember just throwing a fit, and the kids on the bus probably just wondered why I was throwing a fit. They probably thought he was mean to me, and that wasn't the case. I think I just missed having a mother figure, and Grandma was definitely a mother figure for me. I was the oldest grandchild, and so I think she kind of spoiled me, and she would hide cookies and stuff like that, or if she had something special that she would think that I wanted or would like, she would sneak it to me and not let anybody else see it. But when we were growing up, I remember that there was a place where we would have to go with my dad, and it was a giveaway, like food giveaway. And when I was talking to Gary last night, he reminded me that there was like big blocks of cheese, like American cheese, and it would probably be about a 5-pound square loaf of cheese. And then we would get powdered eggs that you just mixed water with, and they would end up being like scrambled eggs when you fixed them. And then it was powdered milk that you just added water to, and that would make milk. So I was telling Gary about the time that we had a big block of bologna, and I was slicing it. Well, a couple days before, my half-brother Don, he was always ornery, and he was, I don't know how much older he is than me, but quite a bit. He told me one day that if us kids didn't behave, the devil was going to get us. So I'm slicing a big chunk of this bologna off, and I look up at the door, and there's the devil standing there, red pants, red shirt, a big red devil face with horns, looking at me, and his arms were stretched out, and I started screaming and carrying on. Dad came in to see what was wrong, and it was my half-brother Don standing there trying to scare the devil out of me, and he did. But and years later, like years and years and years later, after I was an adult, Don, I think he took a lot after my dad as far as his drinking goes and being wild, and he had an automobile accident in Coburn, ran into the bank, and he got killed. My half-sister Jeanette, she was a pretty good lady. She was bossy, and she never liked my mom, and then she liked her even less when she left. But she really liked Glenda, and she had a son named Danny that was real sweet, and an older daughter, Eva Jean, who was real sweet. And then she had a younger boy named Rick. And Rick was a pistol. He was always into trouble, always doing something. Even when he was little, he was just horrible. So once Rick and I got to go out there and spend the night, and this Jeanette's Rick would beat up on my little brother Rick. And so then I would always have to take up for him. So I didn't like Jeanette very well because she never made him behave. On on down the road when my dad was sick once. We went down to see my dad, and I had went down with Chris and Ron and Gary and Rick. And so we stayed at Jeanette's house. And so Rick Erie came home, and I think he had drugs on him or whatever. And so Jeanette started yelling at him, and Ron Hauser was standing there with his hands in his pocket, and he was jingling his coins. And Jeanette got really mad at him and told him to stop. And so Ron told Chris, he says, we're getting out of here. He says, come on, you guys. So we all picked up our things and headed back home. And we stayed at a motel, I think it was in Wise. And of course, Chris and Ron had one bed, and Gary and Rick had a bed, and then I slept on the floor. But that was our last time that I was ever around Jeanette, except probably when my dad died. I probably saw her at the funeral. But she was an okay person. I know she really, Glenda was her favorite, and she would spoil Glenda. And the rest of us kids always kind of felt like we never meant anything to her. But like I said, I'm sure that Glenda was probably like a little girl that she wanted, and she was going to take Glenda when they were going to split us up. And at least that's what I was told. I'm guessing that it was true, because I do know they were going to split us up, and either Jeanette or Julie would have taken Glenda. So I'm just trying to think of any other things that happened to us growing up. We had to walk quite a bit to get to school, even when we moved to Ohio. Glenda and I would walk from Milburn Avenue over to Harding, and then sometimes we would get a ride. I had a friend named Gloria Shepard whose mother would stop and pick me up, or Portia Malone would stop, and then at lunchtime, Nancy Smith was a real good friend of mine, and Sue Gruber, and so Nancy would take me to my job at Silver Street School, and then she would go to work at Probe, so it wasn't that far out of her way, but we would usually do that. And I just had some really good friends that I could depend on, because my stepdad and my mother surely didn't try to do anything to help us out. So I'm going to continue on with this as I think of things. My mother was, I think she was a very disturbed woman. I don't know if my grandpa was mean to those kids growing up, but my mother was the oldest of 15 kids. I think she had a lot of stuff on her plate, and I think she had to do a lot around the house. And I have been told by an aunt that they were abused, but I'm not sure. I don't know how she and my dad met. I wish I did know. But before my dad met her, I was told that he owned a restaurant, and it was called the Happy Haven, which is a very fitting name, because my dad was always happy, always smiling, just the happiest person. And that kind of all changed when my mother left. He became, I think he was just a lonely person. But she was kind of mean, and she would threaten the kids, especially after Mikey died. She had a pitchfork and was going to stab Chris or Rick. I'm not sure which ones, maybe all three, but I know Chris and Rick. Chris left home at early age too. She did graduate, but she couldn't wait to get out of there, so she got married at a young age, and she's had a happy life. And same thing with Glenda. We all got married young, and made some mistakes over the years, but who hasn't? And a lot of things I wish I could have a redo over, but some of the things I would do over again. And one of them is marrying my wonderful husband. And with Matt, we were in Alaska. We came home when he was in kindergarten, and I took him to school the first day. And he was took him to Meeker. Marilyn White was, I don't know what her married name was, but Dick had known her back when they were growing up. And so she came out in the lobby to meet me, and she took a hold of Matt's hand, and she turned around and looked at me, and of course I had big tears in my eyes, and Matt turns around and says, "Bye, Mommy." And I'm about ready to cry, and so Marilyn looks at me and she goes, "He's going to be okay, Mom." And so she waves to me, and I cried all the way back home. But he was a cute little kid, and he was so smart. Learned to read and write before he started school. Learned how to read on the way to Alaska when he was only 5. He could read all the signs and kilometers and construction, and Dick couldn't understand how he knew how to read all that. But he was just always, it seemed like he just could read like when he was 3 or 4 years old. But he was just always a joy to be around. And we went on a vacation once, and we were out, I think it was in Minnesota, and we needed, maybe it was Alaska, and we needed money change for the coin laundry. So Matt went to get some change, and when he was coming back, his dad growled at him like a bear, and so Matt was running so fast, and he just like stopped dead in his tracks. And I'm just thinking, I hope he just doesn't get mad and throw away my quarters because I need them for the washing machine. But we went to Jack Lake, and he had some little friends up there that we went up, 2 or 3 summers, and those kids were usually all there because they were from a big town close to Toronto, and a little girl named Andrea that was cute as a button, and they were probably 6, 7 years old, and my in-laws would go with us, and Bill was always a blast to be around, and then sometimes he would say, "Now, Brenda, tell Butch we got to go to town today." And I knew when we had to go to town, it would be because my mother-in-law wanted some booze, but she wouldn't want to ask to go do it because she knew Dick might not want to take her. So Bill would say to me, "Tell Butch we need to go to town." Or he'd say, "Hey, Brenda, I don't think we want to cook tonight. How about we go here? How about," and that would be like when we were camping, he would pick up corn or get hamburgers or something for the grill. And he was just the nicest man. I mean, he was just like, you just couldn't beat him. I mean, if I had to say the perfect guy, Bill was probably close to perfect as anybody. And I always had a good time with my mother-in-law. And of course, we had good times with Evelyn and Harold. We would go out west with them and do things. And we had, it was just a good time. And Evelyn was funny, and she just, was always kind of like my second mother to Imogene. And we had some good times and some good vacations and good friends out west, and just always looking forward to what was going to happen next. So Matt always usually had birthday parties growing up and would have friends over, and like Halloween parties, they'd be bobbing for apples and having all this. And Billy and Scott Eckler was, oops. Wait a minute, I got to stop this now. So one of the other memories that I have was when Matt was born. Louise was the first visitor that came over, and she brought us brownies. And she just really took a shine to Matt and just thought the world of him. She watched him quite a bit, and Max one day came up the stairs and said something really loud, and it scared Matt. And so for a little while, Matt was kind of shy away from him because he was so loud, but Max felt bad about it. But we had some really good times with Max and Louise. They were our best friends for many years, and Max worked for us at Custom Built Homes, very dependable. Louise and I had a lot of good times together, and over the years just kind of drifted apart. She became involved with Mick's boys, and Mickey came into the picture, and so then she just spent all of her time, sticking up for him and getting him out of trouble. And they sold their house and moved to town, and we miss them, but, they're older now, and I guess Max has got some memory problems going on. I'm not sure what's happened to Louise. She was in a bad car accident a few years ago, and I think that kind of messed her up a little bit. But so Matt got his first haircut, and he always had a lot of curls, and he was about 1.5 years, and he just had such pretty hair. And we were at the Columbus Zoo or the fair, and I remember somebody said, "Bring your little girl over here and get her picture taken." And Matt's dad said, "That does it. That kid's getting a haircut." So about the next day or so, took him out South Lamar, and he got his haircut. And so he went from being a little curly-headed baby to a little 18-month-old boy. And speaking of hair, seems like he's got a real issue with that going on. When he was probably, I don't know, I'm going to say he was probably a freshman or sophomore, he and some of his friends was with some other people, and a girl named Holly decided that she was going to give him a haircut. Well, she did. There was big hunks of it taken out, and it looked like a chemo patient. And I remember when he came home, we lived on Stephanie Drive, and I was so upset with him. I just couldn't believe that he let her cut his hair. So Dick thought it was funny, and he was bent over the car laughing, and then I was mad at him because I didn't think anything funny about this. So he had to go out to the mall, and I think Brian Lauer went with him and got his hair cut shorter to try to hide the bald spots that Holly put in there. And incidentally, coincidence, Holly's a hairdresser now, so I think she had her very first client way back when she was about 14 years old. So best of luck, Holly. So then my brother, Rick, when he moved away, he would come to visit us once in a while. And on one of his trips before he was married, he came to see us. And we were going through McDonald's, and Rick kept ordering something, and the girl kept messing it up. And Rick repeated it like 3 times, and she kept telling him it was something else. And he finally just said, "Just forget it, Dingy." And he pulled out a line, and Matt and I was cracking up. And one other time, Rick and Bill and Matt were in the back seat, and Dick and I was in the front seat, and we went for a drive. Maybe, I don't know if it was over toward Indian Lake, and we got ice cream sundaes or whatever. And so Rick bends his spoon up to make it look like an accordion, and there was some girls walking by, and he just makes this funny face and has his spoon stuck out. And Bill started laughing. He had a mouthful of ice cream, and he started choking on it, and it came out his nose, and the girls looked at him like he was all possessed or something. And but we had some good times. And in 2003, Rick passed away. I miss him every day, and I wish there was something that, if we'd known how bad he was and how depressed he was, I wish there would have been something we could have done to keep him alive, because I sure do miss him, and I think about him a lot. And I'm sure that my other brothers and sisters and Matt and my other nieces and nephews, I'm sure they all miss him, because he was like the funny uncle that everybody, I don't mean funny as in funny, I mean the ha-ha type that would keep you in stitches. So, but my grandma, when she died, she had 88 grandkids and 78 great-grandkids. My mother has 10 kids, 23 grandchildren, 32 great-grandchildren, and 7 great-great-grandkids. So we've got a lot of family that, we've kind of, which would be nice if we could get together once in a while with all of us siblings and all of our kids. But with half of them living in Virginia, I don't know that that's ever going to happen. And my half-brother Andy, he lives in North Carolina. And a few years ago, I guess his wife has decided that she doesn't want to have anything to do with anybody in the family. So we haven't heard anything from Andy for a long time, which, that's his problem. It's not ours. So we didn't make the decision. So, anyway, I don't want to forget about my bonus kids, my bonus grandkids and great-grandkids. The bonus means that they're not blood relatives, but they are, because you love them just as much and you think just as much of them. And we've had a lot of good times with with our grandkids. When Richie was little, we had him quite a bit. He would come to visit us, and he would say, "Hey, Grandpa, why is the sky blue? Hey, Grandpa, why is the grass green?" Every time he talked to Grandpa, it would always be like, "Hey, Grandpa." And that just got to be a joke with us all the time, because he was just always wanted to know stuff, and he thought Grandpa knew the answer to everything. And when Chandra was little, we had her off and on, not a whole lot, but we had her off and on, and she would spend the night occasionally. And unfortunately, as she's gotten older, she's become distant, and we never see her or her kids. But, it is what it is, and there's nothing we can do to change that. So we'll just have to take one day at a time and be thankful for what we have. And I am so thankful for what I have. I mean, I have everything I need. I've got, a loving husband. I've got wonderful kids, stepkids, grandkids, sisters, brothers, nieces, nephews. I've got a nice home. I've got cute cars. I just do about anything I want to do, and my health is really good. So I just want to say that I'm sure there's other stories, Matt, that I might be able to think of someday, but I just want to say that I love you, and I love you more. And I hope you enjoy this, and we'll see you soon. Love you, buddy. So I guess if I had any regrets, I just regret that I'm as old as I am, and that our kids are as old as they are, and our grandkids are as old as they are. I just wish we were younger so we would have a lot more time together. I'm just so thankful for what God has given me, and I just would do it all over again. So love you guys, and talk soon. Bye.